I was going to say something cheesy, like it's awesome to be here. No? All right, okay. I'll just do a talk then. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. That's a hell of a reputation to live up to. I'll try and limbo under that. I am Simon Stewart. I have that Twitter handle. I am the Selenium project lead. And early in 2007, I pushed the first code for WebDriver. I'm also the co-editor of the W3C's WebDriver specification. I don't really know what I'm doing. So, I think what we need is a little bit of history. Like, how did we get to where we are right now with Selenium? Out of curiosity, you all use Selenium, right? In one shape or another. Is there anyone who doesn't? Okay, that's really good. Because I asked that question somewhere before at SeleniumConf, and like hands were going up. And it's like, I'm glad you're here. This slide here, at the top is the current Selenium logo. At the bottom, the new one. That's to indicate the passage of time. That's what time does. It passes. But let's go back in time. We don't have time machines. We all have a time machine, right? But it only moves forward linearly and at exactly the same time as everything else. World's worst time machine. 2004, let's go back. I was digging in spelunking in the archives. You know spelunking, right? Good. Spelunking in the archives, and the first Selenium commits land around there. And it's Jason trying to solve the time and expenses problem. So he was working for a company called ThoughtWorks, and that's a consulting company. And the way that consulting company makes their money is they do some work and they book the time and expenses. And we were moving from Lotus Notes onto something else, and that something else was being written by Jason and basically Jason. It was an incredibly tiny team. And ThoughtWorks gave everyone a laptop, and back in that time, it was a Windows laptop, and it ran Windows, and it had IE. And so quite reasonably, management went, just do your time and expenses in Internet Explorer. And ThoughtWorkers, being ThoughtWorkers, went, of course, and started filing bugs about it not working in Firefox. And so Jason would fix the bugs in Firefox, do a new release, and then people using IE would go, well, it's broken here. And so he'd play whack-a-mole, and he'd fix it in Firefox and IE, and then like the one person in the world who used Opera would go, but it doesn't work for me either. Just genuinely the most frustrating experience. And at the time, there was Mercury had a tool that would help you do visual testing, and you go click, 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 and it was all very exciting. And it only worked for IE. So that was useless. But Jason realized that the reason why this application was so fragile is because it was written in JavaScript, and JavaScript at the time was sort of cutting edge. But he sort of wondered whether he could use JavaScript to test the JavaScript. It's a radical idea, and he'd seen the talk about like fit and fit style tables where you have like table-based thing, and so he did what was known as Selenium. And that was pretty awesome. And he had a chat with a thought worker called Paul Hammond. And Paul took one look at this and went, this is amazing. Not the time and expenses app. Nobody says that about a time and expenses app. Like, he could see the potential of what was going to become Selenium. And then weirdly, Brett Petticord, who at the time was developing a framework called Wartier, which controlled Internet Explorer directly, he was at ThoughtWorks, and so he announced Selenium to the world. Move forward to 2005. Shinya Kasutani starts Selenium IDE. He's in Japan, and he realizes that this table-based thing is kind of a pain in the backside to write, but it would be a lot easier if what we did is just record it, like record playback, and that's great. And at the same time, Patrick Lightbody, Nelson Sproul, and Dan Fabulich are taking Selenium Core, and they're going like, how many developers write in HTML? It's a round number. It's the roundest number. None. And So they gave Selenium RC, they wrote Selenium Remote Control, which allowed you to use a programming language to control Selenium, and all was good in the world. Step forward to 2006. I am a thought worker as well, and at an away day, I thought it was in Calgary, but Jason assures me it was in London, because I have no idea where I am half the time, really. I present the sort of nascent beginnings of WebDriver, and Jason sees that presentation and ignores it completely, because WebDriver is just sort of a tiny piece in the entire thing, and I end up talking about using like fit and page objects and things like that, and so people go like, well, there's a lot of good ideas, but the underlying bit is rubbish. 2007, over a relaxing glass of wine, I pushed the first pieces of code for WebDriver to the public. Later that day at GTAC, the first GTAC in New York, Jason and I do the steel cage knife fight, which is still top hit on the internet for steel cage knife fight. It's on my CV, like that's how proud I am at that. Where what we do is we talk about our frameworks, and Jason explains why WebDriver is great, and I explain why Selenium is great, and then we explain why the things we wrote were terrible. Also that year, Jennifer Bevan at Google talks about the Selenium farm that they've been building, and Philippe Heringo releases Selenium Grid. He takes the idea, he runs with it. And now we have the building blocks of sort of the modern Selenium that we're all familiar with: IDE, Grid, WebDriver, Selenium RC. 2008, Michael Tam becomes the first person I've never met to hand in code for WebDriver, and I realized, like, this open source thing might just work. Jason is clearly already like streets ahead. He knows it works. I'm slow like that. 2009, we finally released Selenium 1.0, and that's because we'd merged the projects and I was agitating to get Selenium 2 out the door, and it seems rude to release Selenium 2 before you've done Selenium 1. Jari Bakken joins the Selenium project, and he joins at a hackathon, and he sits next to me, and in 24 hours he's replicated 2 years worth of work, which is a humbling experience, I can assure you. There's nothing like, I don't know, it's so incredibly difficult, and he's like, there you go. He's a coding machine, it's phenomenal. Now the interesting thing with Jari is not only is he just gifted in a slightly nauseating way, he was also one of the committers on the Wautier project. And the Wautier project had originally been tied to Internet Explorer, deeply tied to it. And the problem they were doing was like, turns out IE didn't crush all the other browsers. They were starting to make a comeback. And they needed Wautier to work on other browsers. And going like, well, what are we going to do? And he went, well, why don't we just use this WebDriver stuff? We'll layer Wautier on top of it and we'll be good. 2010. Jim Evans, who's sitting here at the front, give the world a wave. There he is. He joins a project, and he is so utterly dismayed by the state of the C++ that I wrote that despite not being an expert, he rewrites it all. Now, I mean, he had a very good point. The C++ was genuinely rubbish. A Googler did a code review of it, and the first thing he said to me was, how does this even compile? and 2 days later, he went, this thing that you did shouldn't have worked, but it did work, and I've spent 2 days trying to figure out why it works, and now I know more about C than I wanted to. Just never trust me with C++. I am rubbish at it. We also see the first commits by David Burns. David Burns used to look after the Python binding, still does. He joins Mozilla later on in his life and now manages a team that's responsible for Gecko Driver. So what we have here is a sort of the core group of people who are still maintaining Selenium to this day are now part of the project. 2011, we released Selenium 2. The Selenium project joins the Software Freedom Conservancy. Has anyone heard of the Software Freedom Conservancy? They're great. If you haven't, look them up. We have the first Selenium conference. I distinctly remember the first day where Jason Huggins and myself, we were chatting over breakfast, and we sort of walk up. First day is workshops, and we expected 20, 30 people. We walk into the ballroom in the hotel where we're holding this thing, and the door's open. We walk in, and there's like 300 people sitting at tables. And we turn to each other and go, shit. That's basically correct, right, Jason? Yes, good. Excellent. I'm not just making things up. That's also the conference where Opera Driver gets demonstrated to the wider public for the first time. So the interesting thing with Opera Driver, it's the very first implementation of the WebDriver protocol that was written not as open source, but by the browser vendor itself. It was like the taste of a new generation. It was like that. I'm not going to say Pepsi. It was something better than Pepsi. The Coca-Cola of the new generation. No, okay. Feedback is always good. And then we also merge what we call Grid 2 into the trunk. That was written by Francois Reynard, continuing the tradition of asking French people to write our Grid implementations. He works at eBay, and they realized that they wanted to be able to use WebDriver and Selenium. So he does this sort of nice piece of engineering, and then Christian Rosenwald spends the next few years tearing his hair out, making it thread safe and work. It's good. But just a really quick question. Like, I love the sound of my own voice. That's why I get invited to stand on the stage. But is anyone else a bit bored? Like, yeah. So, thank you, David. It's a bit dry, this, right? This is not like, it's great to hear someone telling war stories about like the dim and distant past. You're not going to walk away from this going like, yeah. Is anyone here happy, like listening to this? Are you like, I hear a couple of chuckles, but most of you are keeping your hands resolutely down, so thank you for that. And it was while I was on the flight over here that I realized that actually this keynote, this talk wasn't teaching us anything. And so, you know, I'd been reading the archives, I'd been feeling nostalgic, and I thought, you know what? Let's take a step back. Let's think about sort of some of the guiding principles behind like why we do the Selenium project, why we do what we do, why do we write software, why do we do testing, why do we do all these things? So the very first thing, and I think this is most important, is joy. We should be joyous in the things that we do. If you aren't enjoying the things that you do, why are you doing them? Nobody wants to live a miserable life. Does anyone want to live a miserable life? Good. No one wants to live a miserable life. We all want to reach the end of the day. You don't, like, on your deathbed go, oh, you know what, I'm glad I was miserable for 75% of my life. And the other 25% I was commuting, so I was angry. Life is too short not to be joyous. We should enjoy the things that we do. We should have some fun. And by having fun, by making ourselves happy, we make the people around us happy, and that ripples out, right? You've all been near to someone who's sad and depressed, and you walk away going, and if that drags you down. And when you're near someone who's happy and energized and enthused, it doesn't matter how you're feeling, you get lifted as well. We should be joyous. Jason was deeply frustrated by the awfulness of testing the time and expenses application. He made himself less miserable, not Les Miserable, that's a book and a musical. He made himself less miserable. He made himself more joyous by writing Selenium core. That was the thing that sort of led him on the path. And I think, you know, now that Selenium has led to his career of playing with robots, he is pretty happy with life. I'm just going to make an assertion, and he can tell us we're wrong when he comes up on stage later. Jason had an itch, right? In the open source community, we talk about scratching our own itches. And Jason's itch was that it was all rubbish, and he had better things to do with his time than listen to ThoughtWorkers grumble about not being able to do time and expenses. Paul and Brett also chafed. like ThoughtWorks would go out onto client sites, and people would go like, you need to test this. And they'd be doing web apps, and you go, oh, God. It's so tedious. Click, 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 click. Paul saw the possibilities of automation and went gung-ho for it. And Brett had also seen that. Like, the reason why he wrote Wartier in Ruby is because he loved Ruby as a programming language, and he wanted to encourage people to pick up this thing that he enjoyed. He wanted to spread a bit of happiness, a bit of enjoyment, a bit of joy in the world. And they saw an opportunity, and they went, you know what? Maybe this isn't going to be the reason why people wake up in the morning and they're super happy. But at least when they get out of bed, they won't be miserable. They'll be able to, the state of the world will be better. And so they did that. And Nelson, Dan, and Patrick from the Selenium RC project, they also joined in the fun. Writing open source software is so much fun when you're with a group of people who are going to be there and you solve problems, and you get it done, and this was the white heat of innovation. This is the reason why we get into writing software, because it's so much fun to do this. And Nelson and Dan and Patrick realized that they could take, and Paul as well, they could take the Selenium core, the HTML tables, and they could write it in a way that allowed them to use their favorite programming languages to be able to solve the problems that were put in front of them. And being able to solve a problem in the language that you choose is a wonderful, liberating experience. That's a good thing. And damn it, I wasn't happy either. I used to, WebDriver came out of facades that I would put around existing solutions because I hated the APIs. You look at them and they would mash everything together. The original Selenium RC API, classic example. You go to an IDE, you hit control space on Selenium, and 8,000 billion possibilities later, you go I have, what's the difference between type keys, send keys, type send keys, I don't know, character down, character up. It's just overwhelming and overly complicated. And I value it. I know it's hard to believe, but I value simplicity. So I wasn't happy with the way things were, but I made myself happy. I did the thing that brought me joy. I wrote the API, and I was getting tired of doing that API over and over again. Every client site, I'd have to reinvent the facade, and each time it would be a little bit more sophisticated. But it was still, just tiring. So it's you know what? And I had a chat with Paul Hammond, who's ThoughtWorks open source star. I went there are two choices. Either we turn this WebDriver thing into a product, and I work on that, and that will make me happy, or we make it open source, so I never have to do it again, and in 6 months' time, I'll be done, and I'll walk away. I'm an engineer. I don't know how to estimate. I did the thing that brought me joy. Paul was it's too expensive to have someone sitting in London hacking on code, so why don't you open source it? So, all right, fine. I did that. And the thing that made me happy, this nice API that was friendly and pleasant, made other people happy. The presentation I gave at GTAC, when I joined Google afterward, people going we saw that presentation, and my demo bombed. It was just the world's worst thing because I accidentally deleted the application the tests were running against. I am professional, as well as good at estimating. But they were that's amazing. You could see how you could do that, and that was kind of fun. And Jim saw the C++, and I think that made him unhappy seeing that C++. But fixing it made him less unhappy. Joy was there, and I think merging the projects made everyone happy. Paul, Patrick, Dan, Jason, the original crew, running into the technical limitations of what we could do in the JavaScript sandbox. And apps were getting more sophisticated. And they'd already been doing it for years, right? 5 years is a long time to be focusing on one problem. And then I came along with the boundless enthusiasm of the idiot, going I know what we're going to do. I'll just do a binding that ties tightly to each of the browsers It'll be specific to each driver. There'll be no way to share code. That seems like a great idea. And they went, really? And I went, yeah! And they went, all right, fine, here's the keys. And the way Paul Hammond describes it is they handed over the keys and then ran. Which brings me on to the next thing. Embrace serendipity. Originally, the slide was be lucky, right? That's the thing we need to do. But it isn't luck, it's serendipity. I was talking to Kent Beck, and I went like, I was really lucky once, and then I've continued to be lucky. And he goes like, well, no, you were lucky once, and then you worked really hard to make sure there was more luck available. This isn't always true. You can work really hard and be unlucky. I totally acknowledge that. This is survivor bias speaking. You know survivor bias? Like people who win the lottery go like, yes, well, this is what I do, and this is what allowed me to win the lottery. And you're going like, how do you know? Like there are thousands of people all over the world doing exactly the same thing. They didn't win the lottery. So I realize entirely this is survivor bias, but run with me with this. So yeah, being in the right place at the right time with the right tech. When Selenium started, the web was slow and awful, and it was getting better. I think if we were to start the original Selenium project today, I mean, it would be impossible. Applications are so sophisticated, JavaScript so limited, the way we do things so complicated that there's no way the original approach of just writing a bit of JavaScript and hoping it'll all work out would ever scale and be as successful as it was. But it turns out, going back in time, because everything was so new and fresh, that approach worked. Like Jason and the Selenium project started off in the right place at the right time. ThoughtWorks. Paul, Jason, me, we were all thought workers. That's how we got our introductions to each other. You know, Paul and Jason were sitting in the Chicago office. They'd meet quite often. Brett was there in Chicago as well. That was cool. Paul was also London-based, and I would go to the pub and drink with him. And he was a friend of mine from the Agile community. You know, it's serendipitous that we happen to be in the same places and in the same company, given the same opportunities to mix and communicate and chat and form personal bonds. Dan Quayler did a lightning talk at Selenium Conf in London. We invited Jason to Selenium Conf in London because he's a thoroughly entertaining speaker who has robots. Jason saw Dan doing his lightning talk and was so impressed by Appium. He went and sort of had a chat with him, and that's how we ended up with the current Appium project, right? A serendipitous meeting of two people and somebody going like, this is a thing that we could do. Like, and Jason persuaded Dan to use the WebDriver protocol, right? And that's the thing that allows us to use the same set of APIs to test on the web and on mobile and our native applications. Like, that was a really, really lucky thing. And serendipity is hindsight. You look back on things and you go like, yeah, that was perfect. Like, you know, if you were there at Selenium Conf in London and you saw Dan and Jason meet, you might go, they're having a nice chat. It's only with hindsight that we're able to go, and from that something amazing came. And the other thing, of course, is that because it's hindsight, you can look back in time and you can find serendipity littering your life. All the good things that have happened, the friends you met, the way you met them. Maybe you've got friends from university or school or college, and you're going like, if I hadn't joined that course, if I hadn't done that thing, I wouldn't have met this person that is now a key part of my life. You know, I don't know how if any of you are married, but how you met your spouse. You know, that's a serendipitous thing that happened to you, and at the time it was just a thing that happened, and looking back with hindsight, it happened. So you can look at life, and you can choose sometimes the things that you go like, that was where this started, that was where this lucky thing occurred. But you never really notice serendipity when it's happening. It's like the quote, you know, how do we know that these, you know, when the good old days are? If I could really appreciate them properly. Now are the good old days. Which reminds me, we should be thankful. Yeah? We should be joyous. We should embrace serendipity into our lives, and we should be thankful. If you spend your life looking at things and thinking about the things you haven't got, the things that went wrong, the things that were bad, you end up becoming an emotional vacuum and a hollow human being who is never satisfied with life. You might become President of the United States of America, but there is nothing that will fill that void within you. Be thankful. Be happy about all the things that are happening in your life. Like, appreciate the things that are good. There will always be things that are bad. I look at the Selenium code base, and I see we have in the order of like a mind-boggling number of open bugs. And there are people who are grumpy, and we still haven't got Selenium 4 out the door, and the spec isn't finished. And there's a lot where it's like, ugh, this is trying, and this is difficult. And then I think about all the things that are awesome, right? Like, off the back of this sitting down and typing and being opinionated, I'm here in San Francisco talking to all of you, and you're being very patient and listening to me talk about motivational posters. Like, that's amazing, right? And it isn't just big things, there's small things all the time. Like, life is good. Life is bad sometimes, but you can't spend your life looking at the bad things. I mean, how lucky were we? This thing we care about. It's why we're all here. Selenium, automated testing, our careers based around, like I always wanted a job with indoor work with no heavy lifting. Like, that's a Terry Pratchett quote, and it's like, yep, that's exactly what I want. But we've built companies, Source Labs. Patrick Lightbody has had like a couple of successful companies off the back of Selenium. We built careers. Like, whose day job is it to use Selenium or Source Labs or like automated testing? Yeah, there's hands going up all over the room, right? We are lucky. And the best thing that I find about it, like just looking back, is all this work has brought me friendships. Like Jim down there on the front row, he and I met through the work that we do, and I count him as one of my personal friends. Jason, John, loads of people at Source Labs, loads of people in this room. David, I saw you were here. Where are you? There you are. There's all these personal connections that I've met and made, and you have as well. You've got people that you know in your life like this because you were involved with this thing. And you don't need to like the thing. Heaven alone knows I swear at Selenium and WebDriver all the time. But I'm really appreciative of the people that I have around me and the opportunities that have come my way. And the nice thing is, people still care. Like, that's phenomenal. This thing has been running Jason's code 2004, 14 years. It's going to be, that's how old it is. It's almost old enough to say it hates us, slam the door, and walk out and never talk to us again. And we can still make a positive difference to people's lives. Like the Appium work, corralling mobile testing and making it sort of a tractable problem rather than an intractable horror is just an amazing thing, and we should be thankful for that. And the spec. Like, if it hadn't been for Opera coming down and doing their native implementation, the other browser vendors probably wouldn't have got on board. We wouldn't have started the spec, and we'd be stuck because browsers are now fantastically complicated beasts. And you need to be able to go into the bowels of it and make changes to the way the browser itself works in order to automate it. Like, that's a phenomenally lucky thing. How lucky will we be? Talking to the guy who thought he'd be finished in 6 months. I've no idea. But the nice thing is that we're going to move forward as a community. And so the next thing that we should remember is to be a community. We should be joyous. We should embrace serendipity. We should be thankful. We should be a community. We can be here to support each other. A Selenium project is family. Like for me, I know that I can go anywhere in the world, say, hey, as a person working in Selenium, is there a meetup? There's likely to be a meetup. Or there'll be someone who'll be pleased to see my face, and equally likely, someone who'll be really upset to see my face. The Selenium project is family, right? Like, and we've done this as a community. Like, you hop onto the IRC channel or the Slack channel, you see people just chatting, hanging out, sharing jokes, like the way you do with your friends, and you kick back, and that's an amazing thing. And technology, the technology that we do, not only Selenium. Have you spotted this up there? This is Berlin, isn't it? This is where we went for a steak dinner in Berlin. Technology isn't about silicon. It's about passion, it's about people, it's about personal connection. You talk to anyone who's a senior developer, and they will tell you that they have to talk to people all the time. It's why they hate becoming tech leads, because they stop writing code and they start talking to people. I didn't get into IT to talk to people. Clearly, I'm failing. It relies on individual connection. So taking a look from the Selenium project, like the connection between Paul and Jason and Brett and myself and all the people committing, the thing that makes the project work. And when we have differences of opinion, we know that we respect each other's technical capability. We know that everyone is trying to do the right thing. And that's a really good thing, because it turns out people are the worst. Just awful. Like, quite often on the Selenium IRC channels or on Twitter or on the user groups, you get someone going like, I hate this, it's all rubbish. And I need to remind myself that, like, very few people like to acknowledge that they don't know something in public. Very few people like to admit they're wrong. Like, it takes a brave soul to back down and go like, you know what? I was mistaken about that. I don't know about this. I have no idea how to do this. Like, you need to be pretty secure in what you're doing to be able to feel confident and comfortable doing that. And when people don't feel confident, when they don't feel comfortable, they mask. They put another emotion on top of it. And anger is the easy one. This doesn't work. They're not angry because it doesn't work. They're angry because it's not working for them. And there's a thing that can be done. And so when people come onto the mailing list, when they're at their most frustrated and at their most annoyed and at their most vulnerable, and they're lashing out, like, I always have to remind myself, this person is not a massive douche nozzle. They just they're a bit lost, and what they really need is a hug. And that's true on the Selenium project, but it's also true in your day-to-day development life. And in fact, in lots of parts of your life. Like, ascribe to people the best of intentions, and it turns out most of the time you're right. There will be psychopaths who take advantage of you. Never mind. So the Software Freedom Conservancy, that's a pretty amazing thing. You've probably never heard of them unless you've been to a Selenium talk. Does anyone here use Git? Mercurial? Samba? Wine? Any of those pieces? Boost, if you're a C++ programmer? Selenium? These are, yeah, hopefully there's a few hands going up for Selenium. These are all projects run under the aegis of the Software Freedom Conservancy. They're a non-profit organization, and what they do is they take a lot of the complexity out of our lives by allowing us to focus on technology, and they focus on things like copyright enforcement and making sure that if there's a problem with IP, there's something, and if we need help organizing something, they help us do that, and if there's a legal problem, they help us with that. They take away all the stress of running a project and allow us to just be a community and enjoy ourselves. And if it wasn't for the SFC, the Selenium community would be a lot more stressed. I mean, there are people involved with the Selenium project who are stressed. And, you know, another part of the community are the browser vendors and the W3C. The W3C, I'm here to tell you, is deeply bureaucratic. It's incredibly frustrating. They're doing it because they need to know that people can implement the standards. What they're doing is they're trying to defend, like, for the long term. There are short-term fixes where it's like, this would be expedient and this would be nice, and they're going, we put these layers of bureaucracy in so that, in 20 years' time, this thing will still work. And they've curated standards, HTML, CSS, the things that make the modern web the modern web. And the browser vendors are part of the Selenium community as well, right? They come in and we chat to them. We chat to the people at Microsoft. We chat to the people at Apple. We chat to the people working on the Chrome team. Talk to the people like all over the place. Even Mozilla we talk to. The Mozilla people are lovely. So we have this fantastic community that we are part of, and it's bigger than the thing that we think of. Like whenever I think of Selenium, I think of the open source code, and then I remember there's all these other pieces. And then like there's companies based around it. Like SourceCon wouldn't be happening in the way it's happening right now if it wasn't for Selenium. So we should be joyous. We should embrace serendipity. Should be thankful. We should be a community. And we should keep on growing. Like, if you stop growing, then you're not really experiencing life anymore. You're coasting. It's a Leonard Cohen line. Ring the bells that can still ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in. I always use this as an analogy for, it's a lovely piece of poetry anyway, but I use it as an analogy for the thing that's best around open source. And that is that there are gaps, there are things that we got wrong, there are mistakes that have been made. And those gaps and those mistakes and those rough edges are the opportunity for someone to come in and collaborate and join the community and become part of the family. The things that are wrong are the places where people go and fix things and become engaged. Nobody becomes engaged because everything is perfect. So, like Selenium RC was a chance to grow. It was the Selenium core was running in a JavaScript sandbox, and clearly that was a great thing. It moved the world forward, but there was a better opportunity. There was a chance to grow. WebDriver was a chance to grow. Like doing the native bindings for the browsers was a really good idea, but also incredibly stupid because I had to maintain them, or Jim did, or like the Firefox people did, and it was tiring and hard work. And so getting the browser vendors involved was a really sensible thing to do, and we grew the community. There was space for them to come in, and we welcomed them, and the world was better. It's always an opportunity to grow. Take a look at the things where life is painful right now, and you can improve it. Appium is a chance to grow. Like I remember the original discussions about like Selendroid and Appium and iOS driver and Appium and like all the bits and pieces, and it was hard work. And what you have now is a fairly regular way of getting hold of things, but I bet if you talk to Jonathan about, or anyone involved with the Appium project, like, is it ideal? I don't think anyone would go like, this is nearly perfect. Like, there's plenty of opportunities to grow. Hopefully, at some point, the vendors of the operating systems will go like, oh, you need to do testing and join in the fun. So, yeah. Joy, serendipity, thankfulness, community, growth. These are all good things. But striving, like reaching towards the goal. If you aim for the stars, you'll land on the moon. That kind of motivational gumph. I'm British. It makes me deeply uncomfortable to be nice about things. So let's take a look. Like with the Selenium project, we solved a problem. Like, I don't think anyone out there is going like, you know what we need to do? We need to create a completely new way of automating web browsers. Like, that out-of-process control of a web browser problem is solved. We don't need to go back. We don't need to think about it. There are opportunities to improve it. There's a bunch of tooling based around the Chrome debugging protocol, which is specific only to Chrome, which gives you some insight and control over things that WebDriver by design doesn't give you. There's opportunities there. But there's things like that. So browser automation was a really difficult problem. But somehow we solved it. And I think we'll all agree it's not a perfect solution, but it's not bad. Like, it doesn't make people actively unhappy to use it. It may make some of you unhappy, but that's because, testing is hard. And mobile is another problem that we are trying to solve. Like, we're turning it over in our minds and playing with it and trying to see what the best thing is. And we kind of think, and I think it's intuitively correct, that a sort of graph navigation language and a mechanism to interact with those nodes in that graph is the right way to go. And that's what the WebDriver API gives you. And the Selenium protocol has helped. Like, people can take their Appium test and they can run it on the Selenium grid. Source Labs didn't need to do a huge amount of engineering of the protocol in order to get Appium running in their cloud. I hope not. Good. There's nods. Good. Like, there is engineering around starting up mobile devices. It turns out those bastards are hard. But the protocol helps. And the other thing that's really interesting is that Appium appears to be a family of implementations. Like, you look at the Android stuff, and there's like 3 different ways of making it work. But those are slowly winnowing down, and we're figuring it out. And it's a problem that is going to be fixed. It's eminently tractable, and it's solvable, and we can solve it. So there's an industry that we need to change. We've done it once, and that's a lot of fun. And we're going to continue doing it as we take the successes that we've had with automating web browsers, and we're going to extend it. Maybe not me, maybe like people on the Appium project, maybe someone somewhere else. We're going to extend it, and we're going to solve end-to-end testing on mobile. And then there's the Internet of Things, the IoT. Yeah. Like, really, my favorite quote about the Internet of Things? The S in IoT stands for security. Like, it's a mess right now. It's going to be so much fun to fix that. And like, there's other problems to solve. Like, I'm a huge fan of monorepos and collecting code together. Like, the world is filled with these challenges. And by addressing these challenges and putting forward a case for it and building the technology, we can move our industry forward, and we can do amazing things. And we can do that. And that fills me with hope. And then, I was thinking, there are all these things, right? Like, what's the most important thing that I would take away? If I want you to take away one thing from this keynote, this talk, what I really want you to do is stop and think. Is it thankfulness? Yeah, that's good. Serendipity. Well, looking back in life and going like, that was cool. It's a good thing. Community. That's a powerful thing, right? That's probably a good thing. Like, if we're all, like the Bill and Ted rule, be excellent to each other. If you do that, then you have a lovely community. All the things I'm talking about. What's the thing that's most important? This is my puppy, by the way. See? Be joyful. That's the thing that we should take away. Life is there to be lived. Code is there to be written. Work need not be a terrible thing. It can be a terrible thing. We've all had Monday morning meetings. But it need not be terrible. There are moments of happiness and joy in everything that we do, particularly in the things that we do, right? We are incredibly fortunate, and we are blessed, and we should be joyous. So, everyone, I hope you have an amazing conference. Thank you for listening, and have an amazing SourceCon.